Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the webinar on the double green effect for medium and heavy duty vehicles using RNG to lower emissions in an economical way. My name is Mike Million. I'm the president of the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada, and we are hosting your webinar today. Just before we get into today's presentations and panel discussion, I'll just go over a few ground rules so everybody knows what's happening. Today's webinar is being recorded. Everybody who registered to attend will receive a recording of this webinar within the next 24 hours. We will also send you PDFs of the 4 presentations that are being done today as well as part of the discussions. So everybody will get copies of them within 24 hours, as I indicated. The security features are set so only the hosts and co-hosts are able to unmute themselves and turn on their cameras. Those of you in the audience that would like to ask questions, you can do so in the chat feature. Those questions will go to the panelists only, and our moderator, Jim Park, will ask those questions in the last 10 minutes of today's webinar that are coming from the audience. So we're going to have each panelist do a 10-minute presentation. Then there will be a moderated discussion moderated by Jim Park, and then 10 minutes in the end for audience questions. Today's webinar is going a little longer. Those of you who are used to attending our webinars, they're usually an hour long. Because of the topic that's being discussed and the amount of information we have, today's will go from 11 a.m. till 12:30 Eastern time. I want to thank our sponsors for sponsoring today's webinar, who make the webinar free for you to attend. We have 4Refuel, Enbridge, and Shell Renewable Energy, who have sponsored today's webinar. So again, thank you to the 3 for your sponsorship and contributions to the webinar. Just before I get into introducing Jim, I have a couple sponsor videos that I will be playing for you from our valued sponsors. One's 4 minutes long and one is about 3. So I'm going to mute myself and stop my video for now. And I hope you'll pay attention to these videos from our sponsors. First, Shell, which will be followed by Enbridge. 4Refuel did not provide a video for today, but we thank them for their sponsorship as well. Just give me a second to cue this up. Enjoy these couple messages and we'll see you back here shortly.
Natural gas. Well, organic waste like manure or even food waste is collected up. Then it's put inside a digester. Or as my scientist friend Anna likes to call it,
a giant mechanical stomach. Here's a really small version. Inside, millions of microorganisms are feasting their way through the organic waste. As they eat, they produce gas, which is filtered and collected here to make pure natural gas.
And what's really cool is that it's just like the natural gas that comes out of your pipes at home, except this stuff comes from cows. You see, Shell is investing in all kinds of alternative energy sources, and now they're busy building renewable natural gas facilities. like the one in Oregon.
We make enough renewable natural gas in 1 year to drive a truck from San Francisco to New York City
over 10,000 times.
That's pretty cool, eh? So let's be clear. Converting to cleaner burning energy is a smart choice. From production to combustion, RNG prevents emissions from organic waste, and it's an alternative fuel from Shell that's right here and now. And as for refueling, it's like any other truck. Pull up, hook up, fill up. And that C in the logo, that stands for compressed renewable natural gas. There's enough in the tanks on that baby to drive over 600 miles using proven, reliable technology. Shell is putting waste to work while lowering costs and emissions. Now that sounds like powering progress to me.
To learn more, just reach out to the RNG team.
Woo-hoo!
Thanks to Shell for that message. And now we're going to play the one from Enbridge.
Not seeing anything, Mike.
Built on diesel trucks for a
Sorry about that. Apparently the screen share wasn't there. Everybody should be able to see it now. I'll start this again.
You're here with me at Hiller Truck Tech in Cambridge, Ontario. It's one of Ontario's more innovative truck garages. Some of the cool things that they're working on is trying out different engines, hybridization of combustion trucks, and use of different fuels like natural gas and renewable natural gas.
The trucking industry has been built on diesel trucks for a long time. Now here we are today where diesel prices are at levels that we've never seen before. We have repair costs of diesel trucks that are at levels that we've never seen before. And so it's that perfect storm, I guess, to now make it easier to do the transition.
Natural gas is it's a perfect stepping stone to go from pre-emission to newer trucks.
Over diesel, I'm saving 50% of my fuel costs.
It's the number that everybody watches on their statements.
Yeah.
How much does it cost me in fuel to run this truck down the road?
Yeah.
Most diesels nowadays are at $1 a mile.
Or even higher, because I'm basing it on my very, very light loads.
It's very difficult to lower emissions in trucking just because of the nature of combustion. What makes natural gas trucks special? Well, the fuel itself has a much lower LCI, or it has a lower carbon intensity. Renewable natural gas, which is another fuel that's used by these trucks, can be zero carbon or even negative carbon intensity.
On a natural gas engine, you don't have that DPF system because you don't have the soot coming from the natural gas engine. You have less repairs on these trucks compared to the diesel trucks.
Fueling's so easy. It's, 10 minutes, you're in and out. I can run basically Windsor to Ottawa, and I can run as far north as Sudbury or North Bay.
And natural gas is where it's at right now. So very exciting times for the industry.
This trick
Okay, Thank you to Enbridge and Shell. There we go. Apparently, it sounds like we had some glitches in the videos from what I've seen from Michael's comment, and I think there was some technical difficulties for me forgetting to possibly share sound. I will play both these sponsorship videos again at the end. And what I will also do, I see Michael has already put the link into his, and I will put the link into the Enbridge one as well, in case it was glitchy, so that you can go to the links and see both ads in full on your own if you wish. So it will be in the chat, and when you're sent the recording, you can get it that way as well. With that, I'm going to invite Jim Park on. Jim Park is going to be our moderator today. Jim is the equipment editor at Today's Trucking and Heavy Duty Trucking magazines. He has written extensively about natural gas and other alternative fuels and keeps a close eye on developments related to decarbonizing heavy trucks. His career in trucking began in 1978, working as a company driver and owner-operator until he transitioned to journalism in 1998. Jim has earned several major B2B journalism awards for his coverage of technical and equipment issues relevant to the North American trucking industry. Currently, he does test driving and evaluating of emerging vehicle technologies, including alternative fuel trucks. With that, Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to put myself on mute, turn my video off, and like the rest of the audience, I'm going to sit back and enjoy this.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'll keep my remarks brief because we've got some real experts in the room with us this morning who've got a lot more intelligent things to say than I have. I will preface that by saying I've been covering natural gas since probably the early aughts, mid-aughts, I guess, when a couple of engine companies were doing some testing in Ontario, just trying to roll out a natural gas network and get some engines on the ground that the fleets were happy with. That process has been going on for a long time. Natural gas is nothing new to the trucking industry. Unfortunately, it's got sort of a checkered record. There were some issues with the engines. You know, some drivers weren't entirely satisfied with the power levels that the things produced. And then we had a 15-liter engine for a little while, and then we lost it. So that was disturbing. And a lot of the industry said, well, geez, if we can't have a 15-liter engine, then natural gas isn't going to work for us. So what I'm particularly excited about at this point in time is there's a resurgence in interest, I think, in natural gas, renewable natural gas in particular, as a vehicle fuel, as a means of decarbonizing trucking, probably more quickly than we can get to with battery electric or hydrogen. It's right there at our fingertips, and soon, excuse me, Cummins will be releasing a brand new natural gas engine, a 15-liter engine to be precise. And Cummins claims, now I haven't driven it yet, I haven't even seen one. They've got them on the ground in China testing them at the moment, but they claim it's going to have diesel-like performance. Horsepower up to 600, 1,850 pound-feet of torque, if anybody's familiar with those numbers. That's what you find in a typical big diesel engine. So drivers are not going to have anything to complain about with this new engine. And I believe that new engine is going to help drive a real resurgence in renewable natural gas and alternative ways of decarbonizing this industry, because the engine is what industry wants. And once they've got the engine in place, then I think the demand for the fuel is just going to skyrocket. So all we need to back that up, excuse me, I guess, are some programs and incentives to get this happening. But what's interesting about renewable natural gas, I wrote about it a couple of years ago, and I called the story the alternative fuel nobody's talking about. This is like the industry's dirty little secret, except it's not dirty, it's very clean. So I'm really excited today to hear some of our experts here. I guess they're going to validate most of the things I said in that story. But the point was, for some reason, the battery and the hydrogen people are getting all the attention these days. And renewable natural gas is there, it works. You know, it can help solve the methane problem that we have. Methane, of course, being 40 to 50 times more potent than CO2, which is, the gas we're falling all over ourselves to try and get rid of with these programs. So anyway, my own personal opinion on it is pretty positive. I think it's got a great future. I hope everybody else agrees in the long term. But in the interim, that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to come back on a little bit later and moderate some questions. I'll take questions from the panelists and or take questions from the audience, that is, and forward them to the panelists, and we can try and get all of our questions answered. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat. I'll see it through the presentation, make note of it, and we'll hopefully get to it at the end. So that said, I'm going to bring on Tariq Kouarshi. He's with Enbridge Natural Gas. He's been working in the natural gas business now since, well, for quite a while. And he's basically observing that, wrong piece of paper here, folks. I'm very sorry about that. Get Tariq's introduction here and not embarrass him or myself any further. Just a second. Here we are. That's the right piece of paper. Tariq is a low carbon specialist with Enbridge Gas. His job is helping trucking companies adopt clean fuels like CNG and RNG, and at some point in time in the future, probably hydrogen too. This past summer, Tariq helped launch the Blue Water Recycling and Ontario Waste Management Association's initiative with the very first RNG carbon negative truck in Ontario. We covered that in today's Trucking and Truck News, and that was a pretty exciting story. You'll remember it was called This Truck Runs on Cow Poop. It was a good one. Tariq, I'm going to hand this off to you. You're the expert. I'm fumbling around here, so I'm going to get out and let you take over, sir.
Oh, not at all, Jim. Thanks so much for the kind introduction. I'll just start here. Share. Thanks, folks. There we go. Decarbonizing transportation with RNG. How do I advance? There we go. So renewable natural gas, or RNG, is a fancy word for the purified biogas that's produced from waste organics and sold into markets that traditionally use fossil fuels. For you, the emergence of RNG production and distribution is noteworthy because as long as humans produce organic waste, there will be an opportunity to derive value from that waste. There's some wonderful benefits associated with RNG. They're listed here. Sustainable, supports a resilient circular economy. It's net zero or better, and its O&M cost is in line or cheaper with than diesel trucks, that is. When I started this position 7 years ago, I wondered why we hadn't developed this market further. It just seemed obvious when you look at those benefits, that a fuel that could immediately displace diesel with existing technology at near cost parity was a no-brainer to make adoption real. And yet here we are 7 to 8 years later in Canada, and we're still near the beginning of RNG production development. And I don't know why, but Canada seems to lag the US by 6 to 10 years in this particular area of clean tech. Sorry, I'm just figuring out how to advance slides, guys. My apologies. So nearing the end of 2022, and I confess I'm a bit impatient with how long it's been, how many election cycles and technology cycles that it's taken just to get here where we are, with the recognition of RNG as a rational and practical path for decarbonizing transport. I try to be philosophically optimistic and recognize that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. With that, the next best time is today. So happy to say that things are happening. I say this because there's a lot of good news associated with RNG adoption in Canada. What I intend to show you here is that there are good reasons to believe that we here, the trucking industry writ large, are at the knee of the curve in terms of RNG adoption. To me, the paradox or puzzling thing is that the leading driver of RNG adoption is not so much the actual economic value proposition, it's all this other stuff here on the left-hand side. It's as though the ROI or payback of the business case is almost a residual or leftover from these market catalysts. So let's attempt to unpack these drivers a little bit. In a head-to-head comparison, RNG is the only fuel that can achieve a negative carbon intensity or CI value. Landfill-sourced RNG has a low but still positive CI compared with diesel. Source-separated organics such as household waste can produce RNG that has a nominally negative CI value, which is still something to write home about. But RNG produced from cow manure enjoys CI values which are order of magnitudes lower than diesel. This example here on the green bar, which is admittedly a curated example, is sort of cherry-picked to make the point. But that said, it's still quite intriguing that avoided methane emissions can basically stomp on the GHG scale more effectively than a hydro dam or a nuclear reactor, and as such remains the only scalable carbon negative solution. To finish off the tech comparison, this analysis provided by Clean Energy also points out that payload range and refueling time are in line with diesel, to say nothing of the avoided headaches and complexity associated with SCRs and DEF, which, to be fair, you would also get with electric trucks. The applications for RNG should broaden even further when Cummins 15-liter engine is released in North America. So the remaining slides highlight some newsworthy items related to RNG. Starting on the left, Amazon ordered over 1,000 CNG trucks. The number is actually closer to 2,700. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, Clean Energy opened a new station in Ohio, specifically for Amazon. NGV America has published a report that delineates how California trucking has actually achieved negative carbon intensity or carbon negativity using RNG. So if you're new to this topic, around this time last year, Cummins announced the new 500 horsepower 15-liter gas engine, which is 10% more efficient and several hundred pounds lighter than the old 12-liter engine. And hot off the press, this week it was revealed that McDonald's Canada is working with their carrier Martin Brower to use RNG to decarbonize their supply chain in British Columbia with Fortis BC. Now, with McDonald's connection to the beef and production distribution, the use of RNG is sort of obvious, but it sort of portends a great story for what we could do in Canada with our outsized agriculture base. So earlier this year, PACCAR revealed that their Kenworth and Pete trucks will be the first to carry the new 15-liter engine. By itself, this is a big deal. However, it's made an even bigger deal by the fact that Cummins and PACCAR will also integrate transmissions, fuel storage systems, which in turn should drive an economy of scale, efficiency, quality management, and supply chain benefits. So I think that's something that shouldn't be lost on us, is the fact that the integration of not just the engine but the other power components makes it, more difficult to mess up a CNG truck because there's one throat to choke, so to speak. Not to be outdone, Westport Fuel Systems has revealed that they are working with Volvo to bring over fuel agnostic HPDI trucks that can burn liquefied RNG and or hydrogen or blends thereof, which is great news. It's not just a couple of players. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done specifically at Enbridge Gas. So March 2021, we approached one of our longstanding customers, Hamilton Street Rail Transit System, to adopt RNG and help us get the message out. That was a success. I can say as a proud Hamiltonian, I love watching this bus drive up and down our streets, and it's something I can point to my kids and say, look, Dad's involved in that. But we took our involvement with HSR and said, you know what, it's sort of a no-brainer that renewable natural gas should also be in those self-same waste trucks that collect the green organics that go into the digesters, such as, for example, the one that's located in London. In London, Storm Fisher has a facility that produces RNG that again ends up being wheeled to Hamilton for their bus. But it sort of makes sense that we ought to do the same thing with garbage trucks. So we approached the OWMA. They worked with us to help identify a stakeholder that would take this idea on, and Blue Water Recycling stuck up their hand And in Huron, Ontario, 22 municipalities have access to this truck, and this truck was launched in August. It comes with all the benefits you get with RNG, and it's powered by waste that comes from a farm just outside London, Ontario, Middlesex, actually. And it's a great story. What sort of shocked us was that, you know, we're a quiet little boring gas utility, was the buzz that came out of this truck. Now, that number there, that 700 million hits, it's a bit of a lie. I just checked yesterday, and the number is actually 1 billion. The story has really resonated with Canadians, and as well, we've actually got some inquiries from the US. And, you know, as Jim indicated earlier, it's the holy crap factor. It's the fact that you know, cow manure is powering this truck, that's sort of driving curiosity, and intuitively it makes sense. But you know, basically, it looks like I'm going to have to put Francis Vieux, the president of Blue Water, on some kind of world tour, because his phone's been ringing a lot. He's done this story's been published over 40 times, and he's done actually much more than 6 interviews. I think it's closer to a dozen now. So I'm almost done. Can't speak that much to Western Canada, but I do know that there are public fueling options available. But I want to level a challenge to the members of the PMTC. Across Canada, there's certainly a comparative lack or lag of infrastructure compared to the continental US, where there's 700 odd CNG stations capable of powering trucks. That said, the question we have is: are there businesses that are that could be served by the existing stations that we have along the Trans-Canada Highway, as shown in that circle? If you're interested in working with us, I'd like to put together a proposal where we could take some significant chunk, and it doesn't always have to be from 401 stations, it could be from wherever, but I think it would be great for the people listening, and maybe some other members from the CTA, to take a serious look at RNG. Talk to us at Enbridge and see what kind of proposal we can put to the powers that be in Ontario and the federal government, to make sort of an impact statement, a more sort of mic drop moment on what we can do with RNG. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions. That's me.
Well, thank you for that, Tariq. Good presentation, and some great information there for us. I just want to reiterate one thing about what you said, and maybe add a little bit to it. That holy crap story really did take off with the readers of today's Trucking and Truck News. But a couple of years earlier, in a story I'd done, I covered a farm in Indiana. Cummins tipped me onto this story. It's a dairy cattle operation, 500 head of cattle, and from their manure ponds, they run and fuel a fleet of 50 trucks entirely from the manure pond, as well as supplying all the electricity to run the farm. And they still wind up with some left to sell back to the grid. So, if you're thinking in terms of, well, how much is this energy going to be available to us from cow manure, it's extraordinary. If you can run an entire 50 truck fleet on output from your cattle.
Yeah, I did mention it, Jim, but we have another 50 odd projects that we've identified just in Ontario. That's not even the rest of Canada, that are kind of ready to go.
Yeah,
we're looking for off takers. So this supply demand dynamic is going to happen, and I think it's going to happen.
I really wanted to get that out just so folks knew that this isn't just one-off truck, running in somewhere near Sarnia. This is happening, and it's a going thing. So anybody who's looking for a good alternative source of energy, this is it, I think. Anyway, Tariq, thanks very much. Going to move on to our second presenter now, Michael Deutsch. He's the Senior Renewable Customer Manager for CNG and E2E with Shell Canada. He's worked for Shell for about 11 years. He's been in most of the downstream businesses, including chemicals, trading and supply, lubricants, and now, of course, renewable natural gas. He's focused on renewable and compressed natural gas customer development for Shell and he's completed a BBA in Supply Chain Management from the University of Texas at Austin and an MBA from the Texas A&M University. Michael, take it away, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'm just going to be sharing my screen here, so give me 1 second. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So first off, thank you for letting me be able to speak to the audience today. I am greatly appreciative of this opportunity to provide education both on RNG, but also on, I think, the broader discussion, which Tarek kind of mentioned earlier, which is really around the life cycle emissions of RNG and the beauty that it brings to the market. One thing I will add real quick, just speaking, there was a study that was done, and again, I'm speaking from the US lens, so this is not even including all of the Canadian projects that Tarek was mentioning, but it's estimated that if the US were to produce all of the possible feedstock sources of RNG, that there'd be approximately 36 billion gasoline gallon equivalents of production volume that could be injected into the market, whether it's to fuel trucks, heat homes, power industrial businesses, and things like that. So the question around, is there enough supply or is there enough feedstock? The answer is absolutely. There is a massive amount of volume, and companies like Enbridge, Shell, and many more are developing projects continuously to bring to market with supply. So I just wanted to reiterate that there real quick. But as it relates to life cycle emissions of a fuel source, what we have noticed is that unfortunately the conversation has been driven to a direction, whether it's from a political standpoint, a lobbying standpoint, I'm not sure. But the conversation seems to center around this zero emissions classification. And I want to kind of unpack that today with the audience about truly understanding what zero emissions means. So we've mentioned carbon negative on this call as well, depending on the fuel source. And really, I think that we, as both industry fuelers, infrastructure partners, even the carrier fleets, need to be a bit more vocal in helping politicians and helping governing bodies understand this whole story around emissions, because unfortunately decisions are being made that I think are steering carrier fleets and parties to one single technology, when really we should be allowing the free market to adopt whatever technology makes the most sense for their application, whether it's refuse, heavy duty hauling. Every application is unique in the type of transportation equipment that they would use to move goods, whether it's across Canada, across the US, across border. And so I think we have to really try and push back on this understanding around emissions and around fleet technologies, because if we are not more vocal, decisions are going to be made from people who are not in the industry, and unfortunately that it negatively impacts all of us. So as it relates to this, I call it a tale of two emissions conversations, right? So what we see day in and day out, whether in articles or postings or government mandates about how by 20 whatever the year is, fleets are going to have to running zero emission vehicles. And what I want to be clear with is, when they say zero emission vehicles, maybe it's known by many on the call, but that is purely tailpipe emissions. It disregards what produced that, whether it's an electron, a hydrogen molecule, or a natural gas molecule, what source of feedstock did that diesel molecule even come from? Obviously, there's biodiesel out there, there's renewable diesel. So we really need to understand that life cycle emissions versus tailpipe emissions, we should be talking in life cycle emissions. And so what does that mean? Life cycle emissions essentially are the end-to-end emissions that stem from, number one, the production of the feedstock. So from the point that that barrel of oil, for example, is pulled out of the ground, is then moved via either pipeline or rail to a refinery, as an example, if we think about the current supply chain, that molecule is ultimately refined and then either moved out via pipeline, again, could be rail, truck, and ultimately gets to an in-use dispensing station. That is the full, essentially, well to wheel, as we call it, life cycle emissions, is once that molecule is consumed or burned, there is an associated tailpipe emission as well that we have to take into account. So where so much of the conversation seems to be centering right now is around this just tailpipe logic that, well, I don't have to worry about where my batteries came from, my hydrogen production came from, my natural gas feedstock or any other things came from, because I'm only going to focus on the tailpipe. And unfortunately for us, depending on where you are in a market, if you're in West Virginia, you're looking at basically an 80 to 90% grid powered by coal. So is that clean electricity? No, it's not. But that's where, again, we have to be able to have these open conversations and say, let's look at that end-to-end life cycle picture. So how do you measure life cycle emissions? Life cycle emissions are calculated on what's called a carbon intensity score. So Tarek mentioned that a little bit earlier in his presentation. But a carbon intensity essentially can be defined as the fuel's life cycle or well-to-wheel greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted throughout that whole fueling value chain I had mentioned a second ago, ultimately to where it is combusted. And so what this means is that every fuel source can be compared agnostically to each other. So because battery electric doesn't have a tailpipe, it's automatically classified as zero emissions. But again, you have to ask yourself, where did my energy come from? Am I running clean trucks, but I'm running them on a dirty grid? Same thing in the hydrogen space. Where did my hydrogen come from? And the list goes on and on, depending on, you could run on propane here, possibly. And you have to ask yourself again, where did that come from? So as your customers are pushing you to run greener trucks or cleaner trucks, that's going to be one of the asks is what type of fuel source are you using and what is the carbon intensity of that fuel source? Especially if you are large private fleets that have your own ESG goals that you have to meet, there's going to be asks around, well, what's our carbon emissions reductions by you running CNG trucks versus EV versus hydrogen? So again, you have to think about it in a life cycle end-to-end picture. And so whenever you start assessing in your next purchase cycle, whatever that green solution is for your fleet, ask yourself, where is that energy coming from that I'm going to be using? Am I running CNG or am I running RNG? If I'm running EV, where is my electricity come from? If I'm running hydrogen, is my hydrogen coming off of a refinery or is it coming from an electrolysis unit that's splitting water? So like that's just something that always has to be top of mind in your buying and purchasing decisions. So the chart I'm showing you here, I pulled this from the California Air Resources Board back on October 12th. This chart is basically how California assesses all of the different proven pathways. A proven certified pathway means that there has been a feedstock that's been identified at the production point and has been matched to an end use dispensing outlet. So whether that's a hydrogen station, an EV charge post, a CNG station, all of these different little diamonds that you see in this chart reflect a valid pathway where someone is essentially producing these LCFS credits or low carbon fuel standards credits. So British Columbia has a very similar market. The clean fuels regulation that was just passed and is going to be essentially rolling out here in Canada, getting unpacked, also takes a similar approach to how they're going to agnostically compare fuel pathways. So what you see here and what I pointed out on this chart is, again, thinking back to the definition of zero emissions. Zero is defined where that red little dotted line is, but it's looking at life cycle emissions. So as you can tell, there's the bio LNG, there's the bio CNG, which is otherwise known as RCNG. But then you've got your EV, your hydrogen. And so every little diamond that is to the right of that red dotted line is carbon positive, meaning that even though I have a truck that has a zero emission truck, there's still a carbon footprint associated that in getting the electron from the production through the transmission lines to power that battery truck. On the RNG side of things, what you'll notice in this chart is that there is a heavy weighting of diamonds to the left, meaning that these are proven carbon negative pathways. And so these pathways ultimately are sourcing either from pigs or swine farms, could be dairy farms, could be food waste or organic waste. All of these are organic sourced feedstocks that ultimately are capturing methane at its source and running them through CNG trucks. You are emitting a small profile of CO2 emissions. But when you, again, you weight it all together, we are doing more for the environment, producing and capturing the methane at its source, which is on these dairy farms, than what you'd possibly even be doing depending on your electricity source or your hydrogen source running those other trucks. And so the big focus here is that you can do a lot with RNG. We just have to get the messaging out there to fleets that this is how you need to review this in your purchasing decisions. The other beauty of RNG that these are investments in our own region, right? So within North America, companies like Enbridge, Shell, and others are investing on farms. They're investing at landfills. We are putting our money where our mouth is in terms of making these commitments on these projects. And we need fueling partners and carriers to help us along the way in this journey. But what we can do is very powerful in terms of helping the environment working together. So my takeaways that I wanted to leave you guys with is number one, your decarbonization strategy should be focused on life cycle emissions, full stop. If it's not, and you're only focusing on tailpipe, then you might be doing yourself a disservice and possibly your customers a disservice. Number two, zero emission vehicles does not mean zero life cycle emissions. It only is focused on tailpipe emissions. And that's great. But again, if you don't know where your energy source is coming from, then you're missing out on the entire picture that is decarbonization. So the other aspect of it too is focus on where that energy source came from and know that whether it's a hydrogen truck, a battery electric truck, or a renewable natural gas fleet, you can possibly be at zero or below zero depending on your energy source. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lauren to walk you through some of the additional details around RNG.
Michael, thank you. That was a great explanation of carbon intensity. I've used that similar chart in a number of stories in the magazines, and I've had comments from people that say it's just mathematical trickery. Make the numbers work any way you want them. They don't seem to believe that the carbon intensity numbers can be as low as the California Air Resources Board says they are. So thanks for fleshing that one out for us. I would also add too, just as an interesting point, California, who's big on zero emissions, battery electric going all in the next few years, of all the natural gas and renewable natural gas that's used in the state of California right now, 98% of it is renewable. And that's up and down the West Coast into Oregon and to some extent into Washington state. There's vast supplies of it from the swine farms, and the trucking fleets are taking full advantage of it. But they don't get any credit for it out there. It's all about batteries as far as CARB is concerned. So I think we do need to apply a bit of pressure at certain points to get governments to understand that this is not a bad thing. In fact, it's quite good. Anyway, I'm going to bring in Lauren Folks now, carry on with her presentation. Another 10 minutes of elucidation. We'll all be a lot smarter when she's finished. Lauren Folks is the Director of Sustainability at 4Refuel, and she's focused on helping customers understand the opportunities that are there to achieve their sustainability goals. Lauren joined 4Refuel in 2022 after over 10 years with its parent company, Finning International. There, she was responsible for the global environmental health and safety program. Lauren's passionate about decarbonization and exploring economical ways of achieving sustainable solutions. She has a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of British Columbia and additional training in sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions management. Lauren, handing it over to you.
Thanks so much, Jim. Just confirming my screen is live.
You are live.
Excellent, thank you. And the purpose of this presentation is really to touch the economical drivers and what's really what we're seeing kind of in the industry when we talk to fleets on, what's making the decision to choose if they're thinking about a fuel switch and they're thinking about, how do I decarbonize? You've got your battery electric, you've got hydrogen down the road. And then, some fleets are running renewable diesel and various biodiesel forms. And then you look at kind of CNG, RNG, and what the purpose of my presentation is just to really haul out the economical benefits and incentives that are coming online today, not only in industry, but also in Canadian government to help with this adoption. And so I hope to provide some clarity in that area. And without further ado. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an approach where I compared some different fuels, and so I haul out some benefits. In the chart you can see on my screen today, I'm building off Tariq and Michael because they really set the foundation from an education standpoint of what RNG is. And we talk about life cycle emissions versus tailpipes. So the focus in my presentation is going to compare RNG against renewable diesel, also known as HVO, HDRD, and then conventional, your regular ULSD. So you can see here, and thanks Michael and Tariq both for talking about the technology, anaerobic digestion being the technology responsible for producing biogas or renewable natural gas. Compressed natural gas, which is chemically identical to the renewable product, is still through drilling extraction. Of course, it's fossil derived. HVO is obviously through hydrotreating or the addition of hydrogenation to your feedstock. And then, of course, ULSD, no surprises here, drilling and refining. So as Michael mentioned, the life cycle is really where we get the big benefits in that holistic greenhouse gas reduction. And oftentimes, these products are sometimes using similar feedstocks. So feedstocks that we commonly see in the RNG world, the dairy swines we talked about earlier, organics, even landfill gas, and then of course wastewater treatment centers making a smaller volume of biogas being produced. In our renewable diesel, we see soybean, canola, vegetable oils generally as our feedstocks. Of course, there's other cellulosics, wood chips and fibers, but for this example, I'm going to stick to kind of what you can see on my screen. No surprises here because we've already seen it. Looking at your life cycle reduction, renewable gas can offer up to a 350% reduction from your conventional on a life cycle basis. Compressed natural gas is looking at about 20%. And then when we look at HVO or renewable diesel, a blend, lower blend at R30, you're looking at about 24, 25%. Up to something that's 100% no blend, around 73, 75%. So really you can see where the big jumps are when you get your dairies or your swines, which is obviously Michael touched on this, capturing that methane at source, being able to upgrade it and combust it in an engine is actually where you get your big drops in carbon in life cycle GHG emissions. So now after setting that foundation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the carbon credit programs, which are in place to largely help decarbonize, but I think further really help subsidize the cost of the decarbonization. So the clean fuel regs, of course, came online just a few months ago. I'm deeply immersed in understanding those, really, really excited about the clean fuel regs that are touching, all provinces in Canada. There are carbon credits that are generated and available to bringing these biogas or renewable natural gas into the market through whether importation or projects alone in Canada. And there's also carbon credits eligible in the dispensing. The key driver here is in order to monetize those carbon credits in the maximum fashion, it needs to be paired with transportation, which is why it's a key component of the clean fuel regs to help decarbonize transportation. Looking at renewable diesel, for example, there are carbon credits eligible there. We're seeing in BC the cost of renewable diesel going down a little bit, and that's largely due to those carbon credits as well being stacked in the BC program, as well as the clean fuel regs. So just an overview there of how carbon credit programs help industry to be able to get into this territory and start to build some infrastructure, start to really put out a number of biogas facility programs and really help subsidize that cost through monetization of carbon credits and eventually that credit gets shared down to the fleets to help really subsidize the cost of fuel. And that's where we see big benefits, or I guess reductions over a conventional diesel product and even a renewable diesel product. One area I'd like to highlight is the carbon tax. So the carbon tax is familiar to all of the Canadians here on the call, of course. We're really proud to say there's no carbon tax on RNG. So right away, you guys know the math. You are fleets. You see this all. Every cent matters. When we look at compressed natural gas, so the fossil-derived counterpart of RNG, you're looking at right now about a 10 cent diesel liter equivalent in 2022, up to about 35 cents estimated, or approximately in 2030, when we have that $170 cap per ton of carbon in our carbon tax. Of course, the big challenge with renewable diesel is, you would think, being biogenic, it would be exempt from the carbon tax. It is not. The renewable diesel, in line with diesel, has a 13 cents carbon tax right now per liter, and that goes up to 46 cents in 2030. So, I mean, it doesn't take too much of a challenge to be able to identify that a big savings in the carbon tax is offered through RNG. Road tax. So road tax obviously in place to maintain our roads. Fuels get taxed heavily. You as fleets see this, of course. If you just look at road tax right now, there is not a road tax on combusting CNG and RNG. When we look at renewable diesel and conventional diesel in BC right now, 32 cents, and that captures, you know, your provincial, federal, and then your transit taxes. BC, other regions, 19 cents. Alberta, a little bit lower, around 9-10 cents. So clearly, there's really big advantages to adopting an RNG when it just comes to purely a tax standpoint. I'm going to take a level deeper here and look at government incentives. So one hot topic that everybody's talking about if you're in the CNG and RNG industry is the Green Freight Program. So this program is not new. In fact, it's been around for a number of years, but it's really been overhauled and enhanced due to sheer demand to be able to do more in this space. So as we all know, there is a lot of funding for electric. Okay, 1.7 billion Canada's put forth for decarbonization through electric. We kind of say, like, what about these other alternatives? Jim's touched on that, using RNG, et cetera. So the Green Freight Program that is, like I said, being enhanced in 2023 is really, added robust funding, 200 million total funding in that program. And I have a slide where I go into more detail there. I've been consulting with that NRCan team directly, so I'm able to provide probably a little bit more insight that's been shared. And so I'll take a pause on that one. But there's also provincial kind of programs. Quebec Eco Trucking has a program that's not new. It's $1 million of funding per year per applicant to cover 30% of the additional cost of the CNG tractor. So it's approximately, it's 50% of the additional cost. That's an error. It's approximately $30,000 per vehicle. And then Shell in certain markets have a 30-30-30 program in BC where is very compelling. $30,000 incentive paid toward purchase of lease of a new or qualified CNG truck. They guarantee a 30% reduction against diesel costs and up to 30% in the residual protection payment. So very attractive program for BC-based fleets, in place with Shell there. The important note that I have on these is these are stackable programs. So you can take the Green Freight Program, apply for that, and then stack it if you're in Quebec against that program, or stack it with Shell in British Columbia. So what I want to say from a take home on just this picture is there shouldn't be that incremental. We tend to see about a $60,000 in difference between your diesel engine and your CNG engine. With these incentives, we are confident going forward in 2023 with the funding that's popping up, we shouldn't have that challenge. And at 4Refuel, I can speak to our own. We are leveraging CNG tractors through our fleet program, and we will be leveraging as much of these incentives as we can as well. So the exciting part on the Green Freight program, I had the great opportunity, to be able to talk to this team directly a few times, and they're very passionate on taking feedback from the industry and fleets and companies like 4Refuel, where we definitely talk to fleets, time and time again. They want to know more, and I keep saying, can we put out more information so we can point people? Oh, we're not quite there yet. We're launching other initiatives, et cetera. But the take-home points here with the Green Freight program, it has been significantly expanded, 200 million of funding incentives starting in spring 2023. So what that looks like is it's on my screen here, 5 million of funding per applicant. It's covering a 50% cost share on the incremental. So we got about $30,000 per truck if you look at it that way. Application will open spring, so they're saying April 2023, at which point funds will start to flow in a competitive bid process. We expect it to be quite competitive on a first come, first served basis. Unfortunately, there is no retroactive contribution. What I mean by that is if you procure trucks and then go try to get funding afterward, that is not eligible. As I said before, funding is stackable in up to other provincial and industry related or supplier related programs. 3 key messages here that I need to highlight on the Green Freight program that I think are going to be differentiators. 1, in order to be eligible for the Green Freight program, your fleet must have an RNG supply agreement. That is a key criterion. At CNG, fossil drive does not qualify and will be ineligible right away. Energy assessments will be required as part of the application process. My team offers energy assessments, looks at your fleet, puts together a package on how your greenhouse gas reduction, can be reduced, adopting an RNG technology based on what kind of a supply agreement we can get together. And then further pulls in fueling infrastructure. I know Tariq, you opened up with challenges in Canada around fueling infrastructure. So being able to pair that so that NRCan can clearly see where these molecules are going to come from. And like what I said, there must be able to demonstrate your fueling plans. So these are the 3 key pieces in eligibility of that program. I know a lot of fleets are waiting for Cummins 15 liter, of course. The 12 liter has been performing well. We're running them in 4Refuel today, delivering diesel. But yeah, that's kind of concludes my presentation, and look forward to hearing more.
Lauren, thanks for that. I've always wondered how well incentivized this is going to be, and I hope it's not bad now, but I hope it gets better as we go along. Just a reminder, if any of the audience has any questions, drop them into the chat box there, and we'll try and get to those toward the end of the presentation. We've got one more presentation coming your way from Jamie Lee with 4Refuel as well. When he's done, we'll open up the floor to questions. So if you have any, please get them into the queue now so we can start the Q&A right away after Jamie's done. Jamie's also with 4Refuel. He joined the company in 2003. He currently holds the role of Chief Innovation Officer. Love that title. And his focus is on energy transition. He's held multiple roles within the organization, including the Chief Information Officer, VP of Operations, VP of Strategic Incentives, and VP of Systems Development and Integration. Before joining 4Refuel, he worked in the forestry sector and in a variety of disciplines there, including planning, operations, engineering, and silviculture. He's a registered forester in the province of British Columbia. He holds a bachelor's degree in forest science from the University of Alberta and an MBA in strategic management from the University of British Columbia, the Sauder School of Business. So, Jamie, I'll turn this over to you. And just one last reminder, anybody have a question, please put it in the chat so we can get to it after Jamie's done. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Jim, and everyone can hear me well. I will also say that I moonlight as a internet gamer, as you can tell by my headset. So that's you can put that in my bio as well. Just sharing my screen. Just heads up for everyone. You can see the screen.
No screen share yet. We can hear you, but no screen share.
All right, let's try this again. 1 second. Share screen. And let's try that again.
You got to share a different screen. Right now we're seeing your email. There you go.
There we go. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So we've heard, about the great incentives that are out there, and we've heard, how good RNG is for decarbonizing your fleets. We start to understand a little bit about the engines coming online, which is all good stuff. So the last piece of this really is about infrastructure, right? You can have the incentives, it can be a great fuel. But if there's no infrastructure, it all doesn't come together. And, my job today is to discuss some of the solutions coming online for that. So specifically, if I'm looking at, what we looked at as energy as a service, I'm not going to talk today about, station-based refueling, because we sort of understand that different entities will be putting out stations, traditional stations across North America. And those trucks, especially long haul trucks, will need to go up to the stations and refuel as they would through diesel. When I think of energy as a service, this top swim lane at the top is what I think of mobile on-site refueling, taking traditional diesels, biodiesels, renewable diesels from traditional terminals, rack terminals, delivering the fuel in trucks directly into equipment. This is sort of how Ford Fuel has cut its teeth and done its work for 20-some years. The new world also involves energy as a service, where tube trailers go to stations, not like rack terminals, but smaller stations, fill tube trailers, and then through compression technology known as SWIFTs, deliver CNG, RNG, and eventually hydrogen when that infrastructure is ready directly into equipment. And then ultimately, as battery electric vehicles come online, delivering basically CNG, RNG, or hydrogen in combination with generators to deliver power in places where the grid is not going to hold up, or in places where Michael referred to where the grid may not be clean, and turning clean power on instead of coal burning power. So all three of these swim lanes will be relevant in the future. Today, we're going to talk about this middle swim lane, this idea of setting up infrastructure across Canada and North America, small stations that can serve two purposes, not only under the canopy fueling, but also a place to fill these tube trailers and deliver these tube trailers through to the client sites where they can consume the renewable natural gas. On the next slide, we're going to see, and this is sort of a depiction of the infrastructure is actually quite simple. So firstly, we talked about the SWIFT unit. This is a compression unit that basically just needs to be powered at the site. And then we have these trailers, these tube trailers that will refill at the stations, the hubs, and be delivered daily to the client site, connecting to the compression unit, connecting to the parking lot. And the parking lot is basically plumbed with poles where the trucks fill up. The driver walks in, plugs their truck in, and walks away. And that compression unit will fill those trucks till they're full, and through an unintended manner, stop, and the trucks are full, and the driver gets in the morning, unplugs, and drives away. So when you think about the infrastructure required at any site, it's quite simple. You have, again, the SWIFT, the trailer, you have some site infrastructure plumbed, and you need power, and that's all you really need to put the infrastructure on the ground. Now, what's the big value drivers here? So first of all, as you can imagine, you have the labor savings. So instead of drivers driving to stations, in this case, if they're return to home base, and a lot of times fueling on overtime because you're stretching the day with non-core activities, you have your drivers drive home, park in their parking spot, and plug in. So first of all, you have a labor savings specifically around overtime as well through this solution. You've got modular energy capabilities. So the reality of fleets who are going to try any new technologies, they're not going to overhaul their whole fleet overnight. They're going to do a portion of their fleet, maybe in line with their replenishment cycle. So this modular capability allows you to start with a 20-foot trailer, move to maybe a 40-foot trailer, up to a 53-foot trailer, or start stacking trailers. So the technology is modular, where the same SWIFT can lock up with multiple trailers of different sizes, allowing you to grow over time as your fleet converts. It's a very small infrastructure footprint. So again, basically the size of a 20, in this case, a 20-foot trailer and a 20-foot Swift, a very small footprint, which is nice in terms of land use. The energy can be transferable to multiple sites. So this energy, if required, both of these can be on a trailer, and you can use the same amount of infrastructure to fuel 2 sites if you need to, as you grow the footprint. You're not reliant on local gas utilities and so forth. So traditional stations, upon being very expensive, often allow you or require you to, first of all, have the adequate gas supply at the site. You have to go through the regulatory issues around connecting to the gas line that can take a long time. So this solution doesn't require any of that. And this idea of technological obsolescence, part of the fleet in the future likely will go battery electric, especially the smaller vehicles. This type of modular technology actually allows you to have sort of this idea of polyfuel fleets, where the infrastructure and the trucking infrastructure at your fleet can be cordoned off in different parts of your yard to meet the best needs of that section of your fleet. So you can literally have this idea where a portion of your fleet can be set up for battery electric, a portion of your fleet can be set up for renewable natural gas, and a portion of your fleet can use traditional renewable diesels to get a full decarbonization across different fuel types. But you're not tying yourself into one technology by putting some sort of infrastructure at your site. So this idea of keeping your options open over time and not tying your energy choice to your lease, to your land use is quite compelling. And then lastly, this idea of reducing your CapEx costs by tying gas as a service, energy as a service into OpEx versus CapEx can be a very compelling argument for some folks. This is just an example of a diagram to real life. So you can see here an example of the trucks that are parked at their site, and the driver plugs into the bumper and walks away. Very easy, very clean, no different than an experience of plugging in a battery electric in the future. And this is just a real world example of the footprint that this technology takes, with the Swift in this case sitting, and then the trailer that gets swapped out on a daily basis. Again, able to go modular to a bigger trailer in the future, to multiple trailers in the future, but very little infrastructure required on the site. So I'm going to try to tie all this together in a real world case study based on a point in time. In this example, I'm taking a 40 truck fleet, an average fill of 135 liters per day, 5 days a week, which annualizes the site volume of about 1.4 million liters. On this given day, the delivered diesel price would have been about 1.76 liters, and the equivalent RNG delivered price would have been about $1.01. And what I want to do is show this this presentation, not just on the cost of the fuel, which is sort of evident, but, and I know this is sort of tough to see, but this idea of the whole life cycle cost and the true costing of the whole true cost to operate. So on this left lane here, I'm looking at sort of the equivalent of a diesel card lock, and what you start with is about $210,000 a month in the fuel commodity cost, some assumptions around the labor to go to a card lock and go get that fuel. This idea of burning fuel to go get fuel if you're going to a station for about $9,400, and then a potential slippage, as you can imagine, with the cost of fuel right now, fuel cards and the idea of black market currency is very much real. So based on some assumptions there, we're looking at around a monthly cost of $255,000, annual fleet cost about $3 million. On a wheel-to-wheel solution, you have a commodity cost and you have a diesel delivery price. On that wheel-to-wheel solution, basically diesel as a service. There's no labor because we're taking the fuel to you. You're not burning fuel to get fuel, and there's no slippage. You do have a fee to get it there, but it's a reduced rate in our minds from say the commercial card lock. And then you have gas as a service, a much lower commodity cost. There is a higher cost to the cost of the truck, so we've amortized a monthly cost for the more expensive truck. There's some site infrastructure costs, and the gas as a service cost. And then we've even added some incremental insurance costs because a more expensive unit would likely cost more to insure. But ultimately, when those costs are all accumulated, we're looking at about a 1.9 million versus a 2.5 or a 3 million, showing over the course of 5, 10, and 15 years about a 30% reduction in the true cost of ownership. And then in this example, I've used diesel RNG landfill. Could have used organics or dairy to make this much more compelling. But even at the landfill, we're looking at a 45% GHG reduction. So you're looking at this double green effect of a 30% decrease in your operating costs and a substantial decrease in your GHG factors. So over the course of 15 trucks, or the course of 15 years for 40 trucks, around a $31 million savings. And just a point of notice that why this 25 to 28 to 30% goes up, because if you do nothing, the carbon tax is going up between now and 2030. So, everything else being equal, the costs are going up unless you move into a lower carbon fuel. The other part we don't really touch on here, just the last few notes, is the driver satisfaction piece. I mean, it's early days and it's hard to monetize, but this idea that drivers really receive these trucks well as it relates to the noise, the smell. We're getting really good feedback from the people we're talking to that the driver satisfaction piece is a big part of adoption. And of course, that's based on the fact that they still get the same power and torque on these newer engines. And we're hearing from Cummins that that's absolutely the case. And then the last piece, I didn't cost any R&M savings because I didn't have the real world R&M numbers from this customer in this case study. But the reality is we believe that there will absolutely be R&M savings associated with the regens and the lack of need for DEF and all those things. So not costed here, but this number is actually probably a little better even. And then lastly, I mean, I've personally just put this non-commercially viable box around battery electric. We've also tried to cost an electric scenario in this case. The reality is the cost of those trucks is prohibitive. The real world cases of how these trucks will perform in Canada in the winter at slope, I think is unproven. I just think that by not being economically viable versus a gas solution right now, it's just that the engines haven't been proven if you can even get one. So if you want to act now, these savings are real. It's nothing stopping you from going battery electric in the future when those trucks and that infrastructure is ready. But I think these numbers prove out and show that the renewable natural gas is very much a real solution for decarbonization and cost savings. And that is about it for me. I appreciate your time and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, James. That was a good presentation, and I like the way you pulled all that cost information together at the end and rolled it up into one number that folks can get their head around. There's a lot going on the pricing side with the trucks and the infrastructure and everything else. So to see those numbers come down to just a few columns was kind of nice. We talk a lot about electric trucks. I'm just going to throw one more thing out there. James, you mentioned it, that if you want to go electric at some point in time in the future, like have at her. But I mean, natural gas is here now and it works. And conversations I've had recently with some of the pioneers, I guess, if you will, in the electric truck side are telling me quietly that they expect to see about a 30% penetration rate for electric trucks in the U.S. by 2040. Okay, do the math. It's going to be a while before those trucks are viable here, and probably longer in this country because we've got the weather concerns and a few other things at play. So natural gas is here now. It's much cleaner. It's cheaper. It works. What are we waiting for? Sorry, that's my rah-rah thing, cheerleader. Anyway, we've got 14 minutes to go on the session here this afternoon. Anybody who has a question, please type it to me in the chat to Jim Park, and I'll get it to our panelists. In the meantime, as we're sorting through those questions, I do have a couple here that we've had come in, and I want to start with. First one relates to the the carbon credit markets. I'm going to hand this one over to Lauren. How confident are you, Lauren, that the carbon credit markets, such as the clean fuel regulations, will exist in the long term? Folks are making long-term bets on this technology. Are the incentives going to be there?
Yeah, great question, whoever brought that one forward. So, existing clean fuel programs like the U.S. federal program called RFS and the low carbon fuel standard in California, Oregon, and also in BC, they've been around for a number of years and continue to see great success. We know that the clean fuel regs have been written into CEPA, so the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which is very, very highly enforced, and not easy to reverse. So, am I confident? Yes, I'm confident that this type of a carbon credit market, specifically the clean fuel regs, the federal program, is just another example of what we see in other provincial or state and also the federal RFS program. So that would be my kind of comments around that.
Okay, that's comforting to hear. Tariq, another question comes in here from an attendee. Will the green freight program require 100% RNG, or is there a blending formula there?
Actually, Jim, I sent that question and I wanted to address it to Lauren.
Okay.
Yeah. So, sorry, just so I'm clear, the question is no, they're very clear. So very clear. You must have an RNG supply agreement. You must be able to validate that. You must be able to share that. So it's 100% RNG. You need to be able to map those molecules.
So
would you be disqualified if some of your miles were put on CNG? Like how would they?
Yeah. So I asked that as well. Yes, you're supposed to be able to validate that you have an agreement in place, with an Enbridge or with a Shell or with someone to be able to, map your exact DLEs that you're combusting against your supply agreement that you have in place. So it's a clear statement that I've challenged or questioned, I guess, especially around, year 1 and year 2 until we get more RNG coming into the grid or the pipeline. And the pushback was no, that's one of their hold tight.
Okay, thanks for that, Lauren. I'll put this one out to either Michael or Tariq. What's the potential capacity for RNG from landfill and manure ponds in Canada at this point in time? Can we throw a number out there? There's millions of landfill sites, well, not literally, but lots of them around. Can they all be tapped for as a supply for RNG?
I'll go first. So the answer is, can they all be tapped? In theory, yes. The question is, at what point? Some of them are going to make sense. Some of them aren't going to make sense because of size and distance to the grid, or even distance from an off-taker if you're doing mobile RNG. And to give you an order of magnitude of the potential upside of RNG just in the Enbridge gas grid, we think that we could displace as much as 6% of the supply high side based on the existing available organics, easy to get to organics in Ontario, and that's a theoretical number. Some of the organics, so not counting landfills, just SSOs, there's other problems that we need to solve, Jim, like as an example, the condo problem. Organics get mixed into the garbage chute, and so extracting them and separating them is going to be a painstaking process, and a painstaking and necessary process. But I'm totally guessing if I were to try to answer that definitively, because there's so many other questions that need to be answered around the handling of it.
Fair enough. Okay. Michael, do you have any thoughts on that, or do you pretty much echo what Tariq was saying?
No, yeah, I would echo what he's saying. I mean, the upside is tremendous, but you have to look at the project economics on a case-by-case basis. So one of the big factors is, are you close to pipeline access to be able to inject the biogas that's being produced either at a landfill or a dairy farm? Obviously, dairy farms are very remote, so many times they may not have nearby gas supply. And so when you think of how do I get that gas to a nearby injection point, you've got to truck it. And so that was kind of that tube trailer model that Jamie was mentioning a little bit ago. So Yeah, I think there's a large amount of opportunity, and there are programs, the CFR is a prime example, BCL, CFS another example, that really financially supports the justification of these biogas projects. So um, the there are a number of private equity firms looking at projects. There's large corporations, Shell, Chevron, Enbridge doing a number of projects. So it's definitely getting a lot of limelight right now as kind of the way in which we can help contribute to decarbonization.
Okay, thanks. James, this one's for you. Of all the things you were saying about natural gas earlier and why it works and how it works, why do you think, or what do you think is the biggest sort of stalling factor now, the hurdles that we have to overcome to natural gas conversion here?
Well, I guess infrastructure personally, right? I mean, you can why has battery electric, for small vehicles taken off? Because infrastructure was available at your homes, right? There was a viable infrastructure arm to allow it to flourish. And when you think about why heavy duty vehicles haven't, it's the opposite in Canada. There's few stations, and so to take that plunge, you have to be sure that you're going to be able to run your fleets, right? And so we're in this inflection point, this chicken and the egg, where if you build it and they will come. And so you have now the trucking infrastructure coming online, the incentives from governments through RNG and the carbon credit programs, and you got the vehicle investment so the time is now because of the convergence. But I think before this, just the infrastructure wasn't there, and it was hard to kickstart this. And then with this idea of these tube trailer models, it allows especially return to home-based fleets to have faith that infrastructure is going to be there, where obviously you have to have a little trust for long-haul trucking that this infrastructure is going to come online across your trucking lanes. Mm-hmm. And so the gas as a service model allows you for return to home base to have that surety that the supply is there. This partnership between Enbridge and Shell and everyone else is going to have to come together for these nationwide trucking networks across Canada.
Well, I think there's a pretty good network of corridors now around the country. Fleets have found that they can run cross-country in some cases, and certainly to most of their regional destinations on natural gas. That's going to require, some more development as time goes on. But Tariq, we've been watching the number of trucks in the U.S. growing this year in 2022, but the number of public stations seems to be decreasing. What's happening there?
Sort of an interesting paradox, Jim. What I think is happening, in fact, I'm fairly confident is happening because it's happening in Ontario, is a lot of the early CNG stations, which are intended for cars and lighter duty vehicles, have closed up shop. And we're actually seeing an increase in the number of heavy duty stations. Mm-hmm. with multiple fueling points, so multiple dispensers. So I think that to James Lee's point, there's a business case to be made for in situ, fueling, bringing fuel to people, but there's also the grid, the U.S. highway and Trans-Canada availability of CNG along the highway is also going to continue to grow as well. So both markets are going to grow. I mean, I'd liken it to grocery stores versus delivered food. You need both solutions, and the market will provide. It is.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of time.
I'll just add one other piece of additional context there. I think you're seeing the public stations seeing a declining aspect. I fully agree with the lighter duty for the early sites, but a lot of fleets are even exploring private in-yard stations, and you don't hear about those sites that are being built, and there's tons of them coming online. It's not just refuse haulers who are getting in-yard fueling stations. So it's just that convenience factor of not having your drivers driving 5 miles down the road or whatever that mileage range is to get to the nearest public station. So the same people building public stations are also building private stations.
Yeah, you're right. And the behind the fence fueling sites they don't make the radar screen. So we have ready mix fleets and waste hauling refuse fleets that are tapping into it, but not necessarily being accounted for at some point in the.
If I can add to what Michael just said, Jim, there's also hybrid. If you go to Buffalo, you'll find the local cola distributor is sort of the anchor fleet. There's also a public dispensing side. In fact, Waste Management, with a lot of their stations, have a bit, behind the fence, in front of the fence type solution, and that's what's going on at the Mterra site for the U.S. gain station in Toronto, Dixie, and the 401 in Mississauga. So I apologize for those who don't know the Toronto area, but it's this hybrid model is something that also exists and is going to continue to grow and adapt.
All right. Well, I wish we had more time to keep going with this. It's we got 4 minutes left. Probably take a few minutes to wrap things up and thank everybody. But I have one question here. If one of you can answer it very quickly, I'd really appreciate it. Is this infrastructure being built out in Western Canada? The question asks, we seem to hear a lot about hydrogen and renewable diesel, but not RNG in the West. Anybody want to tackle that one quickly?
I would, so for BC, I think a good place to start would be just looking at their website and seeing what's available there. But unfortunately, Clean Energy is not on this call, but they're building stations, some private stations out, and they're the ones that I'm aware of. There may be other players in the market building stations out in Alberta as well. So the answer, I think, is yes. Stations are being built.
Yeah, Jim, we have in partnership with Shell, Ford Fuel and Finning and Shell have a planned station in Surrey that's going to come online next year as well. So it's absolutely, I know, as well as in Montreal and some other places. So yeah, it's all starting. I mean, it's all getting momentum because it makes so much sense.
Yeah, early days, right? We're not going to build out this national infrastructure in a couple of months or even a couple of years. So, all right, I think I will end it there. I want to thank everybody for their contributions here this afternoon. Tariq Qureshi, James Lee, Lauren Folks, and Michael Deutsch. This presentation, I think, is going to be available, the recording of it at least, online later. Mike will tell you more about that. He's just joined us here for the final bit to wrap up. So I'm going to bow out. Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions and your interest. I'm really excited about this and can't wait to see it go further. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Jim. And, thanks to Tariq, Lauren, Michael, and James for a great session today and kind of increasing everybody's knowledge a bit on renewable natural gas. So I thank everybody for taking the time out of their schedule to educate and entertain our audience. This whole session has been recorded. It will be sent out to everybody within the next 24 hours, as well as PDFs of everybody's PowerPoint. Of course, I also want to thank our speakers or our sponsors for Refuel, Enbridge, and Shell Renewable Natural Gas. I did put Enbridge's video in the chat window as well, and when you get a recording, you'll see it there as well. So I understand there might have been a few glitches with the ad. Some of that I think was technology related, and some of that was operator related. So anyway, again, thanks to everybody. Thanks to the audience for taking the time to come out. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks to our sponsors. And we have another webinar next month, and we'll see you back here then. Have a great day, everybody.